The Earth has seen some big eruptions in its time, but if you want to know when the next supervolcanic eruption will happen, read on to find out what scientists are saying. Yellowstone National Park is home to the world's largest active supervolcano. But don't worry just yet. It won't be erupting anytime soon. In fact, the chances of it erupting in the next 640,000 years is very slim. Scientists predict that there's only a 1 in 7 million chance that it could erupt in the next 100 years. So we've got plenty of time to enjoy the geysers and wildlife. For now, Yellowstone last erupted 640,000 years ago. This means that the volcano follows a regular pattern that can help us predict when it might blow again. Based on this, researchers say that there's a 99% chance that there won't be an eruption in the next 100,000 years. However, this doesn't mean that there's no other volcanoes that could erupt much sooner. And while most scientists agree that the chance of a massive volcanic eruption in our lifetime is low, they do say it's not impossible. Let's take a look at some of the most likely candidates and why scientists think that they could go off sooner rather than later. The Campi Flegrei caldera near Naples, Italy, is home to a cluster of overlapping volcanic vents. These vents have been active since the Middle Pleistocene epoch. This was between 780,000 and 126,000 years ago. Between then and now, there's been several large eruptions. There was one around 36,000 years ago, and another around 15,000 years ago. And finally, the last one happened 5,000 years ago. What makes this volcano different from others is that it hasn't had a chance to rest in between eruptions. Because of this, it's possible that there could be another big eruption in the near future. However, the good news is that if it does erupt, scientists believe that only the surrounding area would be affected. It wouldn't be a global event like some of the others we'll mention later. Researchers use seismic monitoring and ground deformation measurements to track the volcano's activity. They're currently looking for signs that the magma chamber is getting filled up again. This will tell them when the next eruption could occur. Currently, it looks like we're safe. The last major eruption was 5,000 years ago, and since then, it's been quiet. There are still small earthquakes happening beneath the surface, but nothing too worrisome. Plus, there's a few small craters nearby that are actively releasing steam and gases. This helps to relieve pressure and lower the risk of a sudden explosion. If the pressure builds up too much, though, things could get bad. That's why scientists are keeping a close eye on the situation. They're also working on developing an early warning system so that people can be evacuated quickly if there is an eruption. In Japan, Mount Ibu is considered the most dangerous volcano because of its proximity to densely populated areas. In fact, more than 300,000 people live within 30 miles of the volcano. Mount Ibu is an active volcano that has had several major eruptions in recent history. The most recent one occurred in 2021, and it caused widespread ashfall and evacuations. Ash fell over an area of 559 square miles, and more than 4,200 people had to leave their homes. Fortunately, there were no casualties or damage to property. However, there is always the potential for a larger eruption, which could cause more significant damage. The Japan Meteorological Agency is closely monitoring Mount Ibu for any signs of increased activity. The agency has raised the volcano's alert level to 3 on a scale of 5, which means that visitors are not allowed within 2.5 miles of the summit. Authorities are also developing evacuation plans in the event of a major eruption. Mount Ibu is part of the so-called Ring of Fire, an area of high volcanic and seismic activity that stretches from New Zealand to Japan and then to the eastern coast of the United States. The Ring of Fire is where two tectonic plates meet. One plate is moving away from the other, creating a gap that allows magma to rise up from the Earth's mantle. This magma can then solidify to form new crustal material, causing volcanoes to form. As the crustal material piles up, pressure builds up until it's released in an explosive eruption. It's unclear how long it will be until Mount Ibu erupts again. However, scientists believe that the next eruption could be more severe than normal. Therefore, it's important to stay vigilant and follow the advice of authorities, if an eruption does occur. The Taupo volcanic zone in New Zealand is home to several active volcanoes. The most active one is Mount Ibu, which last erupted in 2007. The eruption caught many people by surprise, as it was not expected to occur for another 200 years. The eruption caused significant damage to infrastructure and the local economy. In response, authorities have been working to better understand the volcanoes in the zone in order to improve forecasting and warning systems. This includes studying the history of eruptions in the area and monitoring the activity of the volcanoes using various instruments. Despite these efforts, there is still a lot that scientists don't understand about the volcanoes in the Taupo volcanic zone. One of the biggest challenges is the difficulty of accessing the zone. Much of it is located in remote areas that are difficult to reach, making it hard to collect data and monitor activity. Another challenge is the lack of funding for research. Studying volcanoes is expensive and often takes place over long periods of time without any immediate results. This can make it difficult to secure funding, especially in countries like New Zealand, where there are competing demands on the government's limited budget. Despite these challenges, scientists are making progress in understanding the volcanoes in the Taupo volcanic zone. By improving our understanding of these volcanoes, we can better protect the people who live nearby and minimize the impact of any future eruptions. Underwater volcanoes are much more common than those that erupt above the water's surface. In fact, scientists estimate that there are over 1,000 underwater volcanoes on Earth. However, it's important to note that not all underwater volcanoes are created equal. Some are small and only a few hundred feet tall, while others can be over a mile high. Even though most of these underwater volcanoes don't pose a threat to humans, there are some exceptions. One example is the Kavachi Island volcano, also known as the underwater volcano that eats ships. This volcano is located in the Solomon Islands and has been erupting continuously since 1968. It's particularly dangerous because it often produces pyroclastic flows that can travel great distances through the water. These flows can easily destroy any ships that get in their way, hence the volcano's nickname. Luckily, it hasn't destroyed any ships since 1937. Although it's not a huge threat to people living on land, it's definitely a danger to any vessels that pass by. The U.S. Geological Survey monitors the volcano closely and issues warnings when there's an increased risk of an eruption. So, if you're planning on sailing near Kavachi Island, make sure to check the forecast first. With all of this talk about supervolcanoes, you might be wondering just how big is a supervolcano anyway? Well, it turns out that there's no official definition of a supervolcano. Instead, scientists refer to them as ultra-caldera forming eruptions. So what exactly does that mean? Well, an ultra-caldera forming eruption is an eruption that produces a caldera that is at least 40 miles or 64 kilometers in diameter. To put that into perspective, the largest supervolcano in the world, Lake Toba in Indonesia, has a caldera that is nearly 80 miles or 130 kilometers wide. That's about the size of the entire state of Rhode Island. Ultra-caldera forming eruptions are extremely rare. In fact, there have only been about 6 in the last 2 million years. The most recent one occurred at Yellowstone National Park in the United States, about 640,000 years ago. Ultra-caldera forming eruptions can have devastating consequences. The eruption at Lake Toba, for example, is thought to have caused the largest mass extinction event in Earth's history. So while supervolcanoes are relatively rare, they can have a significant impact on our planet. Now watch. Why did Mount Vesuvius erupt and bury Pompeii? Or check out. How much destruction will Yellowstone's supervolcano eruption cause?